we've talked a lot about Godfather 3
Yes.
before this, so yeah, and you've always liked the film a bit more than me.
I always like the film, I think, a lot more than people who appreciate the first two, at least.
Yeah.
And I love the first two. The first one is the original. The Godfather is, in my opinion, the greatest example of American film I think we have. Citizen Kane, great film, but I don't think it's as good as The Godfather. That's for a different day, different argument.
Yeah.
But I love the original Godfather.
I do too.
I love the second one. The greatest sequel ever made.
I agree.
To a film.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. But
and I like the third one.
Yeah.
Not when compared with the first two, which is where I think everyone gets sidetracked.
Everyone can agree that it's the weakest of the trilogy. Although it's almost, watching this now, it's almost really hard to call it a trilogy. Like, I mean, I think Francis Ford Coppola said that Part 1 and Part 2 are the perfect story of The Godfather, and this is really the epilogue, in which I agree with in a lot of ways.
I would too.
I think it carries a lot of weight from the other films that that Coppola felt he had to tie off, and it has to introduce new stuff to make it a film instead of just various scenes about resolutions and yeah.
I agree, and we can get into this over the course of our conversation.
Yeah.
But I agree that it's 16 years removed from The Godfather Part 2.
Yeah.
And being that it is removed by so many years, I think the epilogue theory is precise. It's perfect. That nails it.
Yeah.
And I will admit that there are faults in this film. There are certain decisions made that I think take away if you're trying to connect it from the first two.
Mm-hmm.
My argument has always been, though, as a standalone film, it still ranks as a much better film than most that are released. It still has a strong story, even if I think it is much more, if you're going to compare it to the first two, it's still got the Shakespearean saga, this Shakespearean tragedy to it.
It has a very operatic...
It's much more melodramatic than the first two.
Yeah.
But it's still the same, I feel, tragic story. But as you said, it's the epilogue.
Yeah.
It comes afterward, and there are things he added to this film that do put it over the top a little bit, that take it away from the original feeling you got when watching Part 1 and Part 2.
Yeah. I felt like with this, in trying to resolve everything, first, the film starts very slow. I mean, I was keeping track because the player we were watching on has a minute counter on the front, but I was keeping track, and I really counted the start of the actual story of the film to be when Vincent is speaking to Michael in his office with Joey Zaza, and I mean, that's 30 minutes into the start. It's that you have things happening that may be relevant to other plot points after that moment, but really it's just scene after scene that has no correlation to each other.
You're arguing, you're pointing out where the conflict enters. The conflict enters the film, which I agree. The conflict enters the film with Vincent.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really start to pick up until we get Zaza and Vincent and Michael in the same room.
The conflict of one storyline, because I would argue they created two different storylines that could have stood independent of each other and tried to bounce back between them in order to kind of give the film a better grandness. Like, see, look at this complex story we're weaving, and look how we can intertwine various elements to it. But I mean, the entire Immobiliare banking storyline is just god-awful boring.
Well, it's a commentary. See, the problem with the Immobiliare situation is the fact that Coppola has something to work with. There was really a banking scandal in the early 80s.
Well, yeah, I know. He ties those plot points together. The death of the Pope, which a lot of people thought was assassination, the banking scandal, and thought, oh, I can make these plot points of a Godfather.
Although they are separate in reality.
They are separate in reality.
Because the banking story came in the early 80s, and of course John Paul I died. Yes, 70s. And before 1979, so he splits it and comes up with the even 1979-1980 period, which is where we're at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree that the problem I feel with the Vincent storyline is I think it works, but I feel like there's this temptation on the part of Coppola, or at least people watching, to kind of take this as, watching another rise, watching Vincent's rise.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's so much temptation that we do have a little more emphasis than on a secondary character like Vincent. I mean, if the primary character of this series is Michael, obviously.
Yeah.
And we had the secondary role in a way in the first one with the secondary primary character in the first one with Vito. Part 2 is solely Michael. And part 3, we enter.
I would disagree with that actually, but yeah, go ahead.
We have Vincent enter part 3. And I feel like there's too much. I think that's where the story weakens. The whole plot, the whole sub-story with Vincent and Mary is, in my opinion, contrived. I will admit that weakens the film. But in the end, I still look at this film as being about, it's still continuing Michael's story. And in that aspect, it still meets and appropriately signs off his tragic tale. He is probably the greatest tragic character in American film. To this point in time.
Modern Hamlet or the modern
Othello
or something.
Exactly, which is why I say I think it comes back to a Shakespearean tragedy. You have Michael is that role, and there's an argument over whether or not he's a villain or a hero, and I don't think that really matters. He's like Richard. He's Richard II, and he's trying to better himself. He believes himself to be able to reach that point, but he can't, and all that he does, he is not that hero. He is not that good man, even though he recognizes one and he envies them when he sees them, like Cardinal Umberto.
Yeah.
But if for no other reason, while he envies them, he recognizes them, it all comes down to that one scene in which he's informed of the Pope's danger. A good man is in danger, and he's not going, and he can't do anything. He's
powerless.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, what you said first, going back to what you said about the second film, I think it's still Vito in a way in the second film, but it's the shadow of Vito. It's Michael reflecting on his father's rise to power and his own, and how different they are, and how he isn't really able to be the man his father was, and at the end of the film, at the end of the second film, you have that scene where it's the entire family is gathered around and Vito and his birthday, and then of course you go back to the scene with Michael sitting in the chair after he's just ordered the death of his brother, and the contrast between at the end of Vito's role in that film, he's got his family, he's got everything Michael would want, and at the end of Michael's line in the second film, he is alone. He has lost everything. He's failed ultimately, despite everything. And that goes back to the tragedy. But yeah, I feel the Vincent storyline is actually the strongest in the film. The idea of, because the Godfather films are always this interesting interplay between the desires for what someone could call a normal life or family, as I guess is best articulated, and the idea of pursuit of power or the pursuit of succession, because that's really what Vincent's role is, that he is a clear successor to Michael. But my problem with his storyline, though, because there are problems with it, is that it kind of has this Simba problem where you have at the beginning he's this very arrogant, brash, impulsive young man, understandably so, given who his father was and his upbringing and such. And he's this character, and you shift instantly in about the middle of the film. The first real scene where we see a different Vincent completely is in that courtyard where Michael is talking to his old friend. Damasceno, his old friend and protector, and Vincent's, making all these accurate political assertions. He's all in a suit and calmly twiddling an orange in his fingers while he's doing these menacing calculations. And I think, wait a minute, where did this character come from? We've never seen him before. It's granted, Vito's not as
as rash, perhaps.
No, well, Vincent is meant to be, I think,
The juxtaposition.
He's-
part of
he's-
three's juxtaposition.
he's all the brothers. He has, I think, Frank Coppola once described it as he has the kindness of Fredo, the anger of Sonny, the Michael's brain, and Vito's ruthlessness, and he's kind of a cross stitch of all four in a way.
This has been a VS1 production.